In the spring of 1200 BC, the courtyard of Kararanch shimmered under a white sun. The air smelled of incense and dust, of stone baked too long. A young girl, Nefertari, knelt on the polished floor while 3 priests moved around her in a slow, deliberate dance. Bronze razors flashed. Each scrape cut a strand of her black hair until it fell like dark feathers. The sound was soft, almost gentle. But the moment felt like death. Her father watched from the shadows, head bowed, telling himself this was an honor. The priests called it purification. They said the gods demanded her beauty, her silence, her childhood. But the temple did not give gifts. It took them. Behind its painted walls, something older than faith moved, a hunger for power hiding behind holiness. What if Egypt's most beautiful temples hid its darkest crimes? What if every hymn was built on suffering? Because here, beauty was born from obedience, and obedience from pain. To understand Nefertari, you must first understand the world that owned her. The temples of Egypt were not just for worship. They were empires, vast machines of wealth and control. From the Nile Delta to the cliffs of Thebes, temples owned more land than any noble and more gold than most pharaohs. Each temple was a kingdom inside a kingdom. At the top stood the high priest, the voice of the gods. Below him, lesser priests, scribes, dream interpreters, and below them, the invisible majority, the servants, the singers, the women called Hemet, the wives of the god. Their titles sounded holy. Their lives were not. Inside the temple of Ammonius at Kararanch, the high priest's word rivaled the pharaoh's. His seal could move soldiers, take harvests, and ruin families. Temples did not just pray for rain. They owned the rain. They collected taxes in grain, lent with interest, and punished those who couldn't pay. When a man fell behind, the temple took his land. If he had no land, they took his daughter. Officially, these girls became servants of the god. In truth, they were property, unpaid labor called devotion. The system was built on their silence. In ancient papyri, you find no screams, no sorrow. The records only mention offerings. One scroll from Thebes lists linens woven by temple women, over 3,000 yards each month. Another notes new girls added to the house of Ammonius. No names, no ages, just numbers. It was all carefully organized. Every woman had a role. Some ground barley. Others swept floors. A chosen few were elevated, dressed in fine linen, and taught hymns to perform before the god's statue. They were called pure, holy, blessed. But purity here meant something different. Temples shone with gold outside, but inside were filled with silence and tears. Marble courtyards sparkled, while in hidden rooms, women knelt for hours in forced prayer. Their voices, once songs, became whispers. To the outside world, the temples meant harmony, the heartbeat of Egypt's greatness. But inside, they were machines of obedience. Faith became a currency for power. And through it all, the high priests preached that every command came from the gods. It was a perfect system, where questioning cruelty meant questioning divinity. This was the empire Nefertari was sold into, a world where holiness had a price, paid in flesh. No child ever walked willingly into a temple. They came by debt, by devotion, or by conquest. 3 paths, 1 end. The first was debt. Egypt's temples were banks wrapped in gold. A man who couldn't repay his loan faced ruin. His fields would be seized. But the priests offered a kind of mercy. The gods are generous, they said. Dedicate your daughter. Let her serve and your sins will be washed away. It sounded holy, like redemption. But it meant ownership. The girl became property. Her father's debt was forgiven, but at the cost of her freedom. Families called it an offering. The priests called it salvation. The truth was slavery. The second path was piety. In times of plague or drought, desperate parents sought divine favor. They believed giving a daughter would bring rain or healing. It was an old superstition, born from fear. The priests encouraged it. They smiled, telling mothers, "Your child will live in light. She will serve beside the divine." Those words were practiced, rehearsed to sound like mercy. But once the girl vanished behind the walls, her name was never spoken again. The family was told to rejoice, to be proud. Their daughter, they said, now lived among the sacred. A mother's tears were called weakness, her doubt, blasphemy. The third path was the cruelest, tribute. Egypt's army swept across Nubia and Libya, taking more than gold. Children were counted as spoils of war, their names replaced with numbers. That is how Isari came to the temple. She was 10 when drought struck her Libyan village. The crops died. Hunger gnawed. When soldiers came demanding tribute for Pharaoh, there was nothing left. Her mother offered the only thing she had. Isari remembered her mother's hands trembling as she brushed dust from her cheeks. "You are blessed," she whispered. "The gods will feed you. You'll live." But the soldiers' ropes told another story. Isari thought she was going to a palace. She imagined golden statues. Instead, she was marched to Thebes, chained with others until the great temple walls rose before her like a prison of light. Inside, priests greeted them with smiles. "You have been chosen," they said. "You will live among the gods." That was the illusion, the perfect deception. The priest spoke the language of faith, but every word hid the same truth. These girls were currency. They were not chosen by the gods. They were taken by men. Before a girl could serve, she had to be broken. The priests called it purification. But they meant possession. Nefertari's initiation began at dawn. The temple doors closed behind her with a sound that would haunt her forever. She was led to a stone pool, its surface shimmering under torchlight. The air smelled of salt, incense, and fear. 5 figures waited. 3 priests, 2 older women. One was Tai, a priestess whose face was lined with age and resignation. "Remove your garments," a priest ordered. Nefertari hesitated, clutching her linen. A slap broke the silence. The fabric tore away. The child stood trembling as the water began to move. The priests dipped their hands in the pool and began the ritual. Washing her, they said, in the name of Ammonius, but it was no cleansing. Their hands lingered too long, their inspection too slow. When she flinched, one whispered, "Be still. The gods are watching." And just like that, innocence was renamed obedience. Across the river, in the temple of Mut, another child waited. Mutamuya, taken from Nubia, did not understand their words. When they poured cold water over her head, she gasped. The women laughed. Her fear to them was proof of impurity. Her tears were washed away with the same salt water that scoured the floor. After the water came the shaving. Every strand of hair was scraped away, head, eyebrows, lashes. Hair was beauty, memory, self, and the priests knew it. When Nefertari looked into a bronze mirror, she saw a stranger. "You are reborn," Tai whispered, but her voice trembled. She had said those words decades ago, believing them once. Now they tasted like ash. The girls were given new names. Nefertari became Nefret Nebet. Beautiful is the lady. Mutamuya became hand of the goddess. Their birth names were forbidden, called unclean. The names their mothers gave them were erased. Then came the divine marriage. The final surrender. The girls were dressed in white, their heads covered with golden wigs, and led before giant statues. Priests recited sacred words, claiming the god would speak through them. Nefertari swore vows to Ammonius. Mutamuya swore to Mut. They repeated every line, not understanding. "My body is yours. My life is your property." When the vows ended, the temple owned them completely. Only Tai lingered in the shadows, watching. Her hands, once steady, now shook. She had bathed hundreds of girls, shaved their heads, spoken hollow blessings, but that night she couldn't sleep. For the first time in 30 years, she wondered if the gods were ever watching at all. Life inside the temple followed a rhythm so precise it crushed the soul. Every morning began before sunrise, when the sky was still ash-gray. A gong summoned them from sleep. Dozens of girls, bald and barefoot, rose from straw mats and knelt in a line. The first ritual was purification by water, a cold reminder their bodies were not their own. They washed in sacred pools while an overseer recited from the Book of Purity. It was a thin scroll, a manual written by dead priests. Every rule shaped their existence. A servant must not speak unless commanded. She must not look at a priest. She must eat in silence, sleep without dreaming, desire nothing. Each line carved obedience deeper. Obedience, the priests said, is holiness. After washing, they dressed in plain linen. Their heads gleamed in the sun like polished stone. Then came labor. Hours grinding grain, weaving, cleaning endless halls. The younger ones sang hymns as they worked, their voices thin. The songs praised the gods, but the lyrics were twisted. To serve is joy, to obey is peace. To question is sin. If a girl slowed, an overseer's staff reminded her of duty. No tears, no outcry, just the hollow rhythm of survival. Every motion was watched, every whisper measured. Friendship was forbidden. Connection bred defiance. When Nefertari spoke too kindly to another girl, she was forced to kneel in the courtyard until her lips cracked. Tai was ordered to read from the Book of Purity as punishment happened. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with shame. Yet not all was silence. Beneath the chants, a secret language pulsed in the looms. One evening, as Nefertari wove linen, she saw something strange in the threads. Tiny patterns that didn't belong. Tracing them, she saw a faint symbol, an eye crossed by a line. An older woman whispered the meaning when no one heard. It means I see. It means we are not blind. It was the first time Nefertari realized rebellion could be silent, too. That night, as torches flickered and priests spoke of divine voices, Nefertari looked at the great statue of Ammonius and thought, the gods never spoke. Only men did. And in that thought, the first crack appeared in her faith, a fracture that would one day split the temple's perfect silence. Before we continue, take a breath. If this unsettles you, that's good. It means you're still listening, still human. This isn't myth. It's history stripped of its gold. Here, we uncover the stories monuments refuse to tell. The truth behind beauty, faith, and power. If you believe history should remember the voices it tried to erase, then stay with us. Hit subscribe, share this, and help these forgotten lives be heard. Every month, the temple prepared for the sacred union, the holiest ritual. It was said to renew Egypt's life, to please the gods and ensure the Nile's flood. In truth, it was the night the temple took the final thing the girls owned, their innocence. Preparations began days before. Incense burned endlessly, smoke clinging to skin. The women were washed until their flesh stung. Their robes were replaced with silk and white linen. Gold bracelets adorned their wrists. To an outsider, it looked divine, a marriage between mortal and God. To Nefertari, it felt like a funeral. She was 14 when her turn came. Tai, now her guardian, fastened the golden wig over her shaven head. You are to be blessed by Ammonius, a priest whispered. The god himself will speak through his vessel. But the vessel was no god, only the high priest, cloaked in gold and shadow. His mask gleamed, his voice commanding. Hymns rose, echoing as if the stones were complicit. When Nefertari entered the inner chamber, the air thickened with incense. The high priest stretched out his hands. You are chosen. The god claims you. She tried to kneel, to be obedient. But when his hand brushed her face, a chill of understanding cut through her. This was not devotion. This was power. And the gods, if they existed, were not here. Far away, in the temple of Mut, Mutamuya underwent her own ceremony. She stood before the statue of the goddess of motherhood. The cruel irony was not lost on her young heart. The priests chanted, Mut blesses her child. As the ritual unfolded in dread, the goddess of creation presided over destruction. When it was over, both girls were led back, their faces blank, their voices gone. The priests wrote in the records, the god was pleased. The land will prosper. They called it holy. The truth was never written. But Tai was watching. For years she had obeyed, recited, endured. But that night, she saw Nefertari return, trembling and hollow-eyed. Tai's faith cracked. Later, when torches burned low, she stole papyrus scraps and began to write. Not prayers, but testimony. She wrote what she saw, what they endured, every lie, every touch. She hid the pages under foundation stones, sealing them with wax. Centuries later, when archaeologists uncovered Kararanch, they found her writing. The ink was faint, but the words remained. The god took nothing. Only men did. Time moved strangely inside the temple. Seasons passed, but the walls never changed. The sun rose and fell on the same cold stones. When Nefertari turned 16, her body changed. The priests called it a god's blessing. The older women knew better. The sacred union had left its mark. She was with child. Pregnant women were hidden. Moved to a separate wing. The air smelled of incense and iron. The priests said they were holy vessels. Yet when the children were born, the gods claimed them all. Nefertari gave birth on a summer night, the moon pale above. Her daughter came silently, small and perfect. Tai was there, whispering prayers that had lost their meaning. For 3 short years, Nefertari raised her child under the priest's eyes, never truly a mother, always a servant. When the time came, they came for the girl. She is chosen, said the high priest. It is an honor. Nefertari tried to speak, but no sound came. The child reached for her, tiny hands grasping at air as she was carried away. From that day, Nefertari never sang again. Her voice became another offering. She returned to her duties, weaving linens for rituals she no longer believed. Sometimes she saw her daughter in the distance, bald, small, dressed in white, walking the same lines. Their eyes met once. Then the child was gone. The cycle continued. In the temple of Mut, Mutamuya's story was the same. Her daughter, born of coercion, was raised under the goddess's name. Mutamuya watched her endure the same purifications, the same lies. The priests called it divine order. She called it repetition. Years blurred until emotion became dangerous. The women learned to bury feeling deep. Tears brought punishment. Love brought loss. Numbness was survival. Tai, now old and weary, wrote again in her secret papyrus, when pain becomes routine, it ceases to shock. And that is the final victory of oppression. Not the bodies breaking, but the hearts forgetting. She hid that line in the hem of a priest's robe. By the time Nefertari's daughter became a woman, the temple had perfected its cruelty. No one remembered the first girl who cried. Only the walls remembered, and the walls never spoke. Not every woman broke quietly. Some hearts remembered freedom. Her name was Renanudit. She had served the temple for 20 years, long enough to know its lies. Her voice was once prized for hymns, but age had stripped away fear. Beneath her calm obedience, something smoldered. It happened during the midday meal. The women ate in ritual silence, heads bowed. Renanudit suddenly stood, her barley bowl shattering on the floor. These men, she said, her voice trembling, are not gods. The sound hung like thunder. No one moved. They claim divinity, she continued, louder. But they feed on our bodies and call it holiness. They steal our daughters and name it devotion. There is no God here, only men who fear the truth. The high priest's face turned cold. He raised a hand. Guards seized her, dragging her toward the gates. The women watched, hearts hammering. She was sentenced to dedication to the desert, the punishment for blasphemers. No tomb, no return. The condemned were left to the sun. Tai followed, her old bones heavy. She carried a scrap of papyrus and a reed pen. They left Renanudit where stone met sand. The priest turned back, chanting that the earth would purify her. But Tai stayed long enough to hear Renanudit's final words on the dry wind. I am not impure, she whispered. I am not afraid. Tell them the gods do not speak to those who cannot hear suffering. Tai wrote those words, pressing the ink so hard it tore the papyrus. She buried it under stones before returning. 3 days later, the women were marched into the desert to see what remained. Renanudit's body lay half-buried, her eyes open to the sky. The high priest declared, this is the fate of the impure. But Tai knew better. As the wind howled, it carried Renanudit's defiance beyond the walls. The desert swallowed her body, but not her silence. Somewhere under the sand, her words endured. Proof that even in tyranny, truth refuses to die. Even after her death, the temple could not silence everything. Words are like seeds. Buried, they grow. Among the women, resistance became whispers and symbols. They fought with memory. Weaving linen for the altars, some hid tiny flaws, a loose thread, a crooked stitch. To priests, it was error. To those who knew, it was code. A twisted thread meant, I remember. A row of knots meant, I resist. Small defiance, invisible to power, yet a reminder they were still human. Others carved faint marks on pillar backs, under tables, places priests never saw. Simple phrases. I existed. I was born free. The gods were silent, but I spoke. Their rebellion was not loud. It was woven into stone and fiber, patient and enduring. Mutamuya, the Nubian girl taken from her village, carried remembrance longer than most. She was old when her body failed, but her memory stayed sharp. 2 nights before her death, she went to a storage chamber under the temple. The air was cold, smelling of dust. She held a pottery shard. With a bronze fragment, she scratched her final words. I came from beyond the first waterfall. My mother's name was Marinput. I remember her song. I never forgot who I was before they took me. This life was not my choice. If you find this, know that I lived. Know that I remembered. When she finished, Mutamuya pressed her forehead to the wall and smiled for the first time in years. The next morning, she was gone. Tai found the inscription days later. Her old hands trembled tracing the letters. That night, she gathered her secret writings, the testimonies, the names, the truth. She wrapped them in linen, sealed them with wax, and hid them under the temple stones, whispering, if the gods are silent, let the earth speak. Thousands of years passed. The desert swallowed the temple. Time buried its cruelty. But stone remembers what man forgets. When archaeologists unearthed Kara Ranch, they found the fragments, tiny carvings, symbols, a sealed bundle of blackened papyrus. Inside were Tai's words, Renanutit's defiance, Mutamuya's song. Scholars called it the testimony of the silent. For the first time in 3,000 years, the women's voices spoke again, not in hymns, but in truth. The world had forgotten them. The earth had not. Today, sunlight floods the courtyards of Karnak. Tourists lift cameras, smiling under the same pillars where Nefertari once knelt. They see beauty, not bondage. They see art, not agony. Guides speak of gods and glory. None mention the girls who lived and died unseen. Every empire builds monuments. Few remember the bones beneath. We tell ourselves civilization means progress. But history whispers otherwise. Wherever power hides behind walls and faith becomes fear, the story repeats. The names change, the robes, the gods, but the silence feels the same. The true lesson of the temples isn't carved in stone. It's written in what was erased. The humanity taken. If you listen closely under the crowd's noise, you can still hear them. The faint rhythm of looms, the hush of voices saying, I existed. The stones remember. The gods are silent. But the forgotten women still whisper, if you know how to listen. If these voices reached you, don't let them vanish. Share their story. Keep their memory. Subscribe to this channel, where truth digs deeper than gold and history speaks for those the world silenced. Together, we uncover what time tried to bury. The truth that still breathes under the ruins. Because remembrance is the only prayer the dead can receive. And you are now their witness.